the end of a dictatorship that ruled for over 50 years, sparked widespread joy among Syrians, both within the country and among expatriates. This joy was symbolized by images of toppled statues and emptied prisons. However, Syria now risks descending into new rivalries among rebel factions. Although HTS is dominant, it does not have absolute control, raising fears of a possible transition from one authoritarian regime to another. Let's start from the origins of the conflict, one of the most complex in recent times, going through all the actors who have been part of the civil war, until recently forgotten, which lasted about 13 years, leading up to the final days of the al-Assad family regime, a regime that ruled undisturbed for 5 decades. Syria, a young nation in an ancient land. Since gaining independence in 1946, Syria has been a stage for internal conflicts and external pressures. The Assad dynasty, with Hafez and later Bashar, ruled with an iron fist, relying on an autocratic regime. However, the drought between 2006 and 2011, rising poverty, and social inequalities created fertile ground for protests. The peaceful protests of 2011, born in the wake of the Arab Spring, quickly turned into a civil war. On one side, Assad's regime responded with force. On the other, rebels, including jihadists and armed groups supported by foreign powers, began fighting for control of the country. During the conflict, Syria has become a battleground for global and regional powers. On one side, the United States and its allies. On the other, Russia and Iran. In the middle, groups like the Islamic State, the Kurds, and jihadist militias. The result: a country fragmented into 4 main areas of control. The war in Syria is not just an internal issue, it is a large-scale geopolitical game. The United States aims to contain Iran and Russia, while Moscow supports Assad to maintain its influence and its naval base in Tartus. Turkey, for its part, opposes the Kurds out of fear of separatist movements within its own borders. With over 400,000 deaths, 5 million refugees, and 7 million internally displaced people, the war in Syria is one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. Historic cities lie in ruins, and life expectancy has plummeted from 70 to 55 years. Accusations of chemical weapon use have added another layer of horror to the conflict. While it is clear that such weapons have been used, assigning responsibility with certainty remains challenging, with blame shifting between the regime and the rebels. In recent years, the war in Syria has witnessed new escalations and shifts, remaining a complex and devastating crisis. After a period of relative calm, the Syrian conflict reignited with greater intensity in 2024. The regime of Bashar al-Assad, supported by Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, controls a significant portion of the country, including the capital Damascus and the coastal areas of Latakia and Tartus. The jihadist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, Assad's main adversary and a former affiliate of al-Qaeda, has launched significant offensives in northern Syria, capturing Aleppo, a city that government forces had painstakingly retaken in 2016. This offensive was facilitated by a decline in support for Bashar al-Assad, as his key allies, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, are distracted or weakened by other conflicts. Russia has reduced its military presence in Syria to focus on the war in Ukraine. At the same time, Hezbollah has been severely weakened by Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, while Iran is grappling with the consequences of escalating tensions with Israel and its allies in the region. This combination of factors has left Assad in an increasingly vulnerable position. In addition to the HTS group, other jihadists or opponents of Assad's regime are also active. FSA, Free Syrian Army, a historic rebel group composed of defectors from the Syrian army. Although significantly weakened compared to the early stages of the conflict, it remains active in certain areas of northern Syria. Smaller jihadist groups, various jihadist factions, often temporarily allied with HTS or the FSA, operate in Syria. These include groups like Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam, which share the goal of overthrowing the regime, but maintain their own independent agendas. Another opponent of the Syrian regime is the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, a Kurdish-majority military and political coalition formed in 2015 to combat Islamic terrorism and represent the diverse ethnic and religious communities of northeastern Syria. The SDF opposes Assad's regime primarily to defend the autonomy of the Rojava region, which promotes direct democracy, gender equality, and coexistence among ethnic groups. However, it has occasionally engaged in tactical cooperation with the regime against jihadists and ISIS. Within the Middle East, Turkey has expansionist ambitions in northern Syria, aiming to suppress Kurdish autonomy in the Rojava region and counter the SDF. Turkey supports the jihadist HTS group, which is also aligned with the SDF. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have previously supported Sunni rebel groups to counter the Shia influence of Iran, a key ally of Assad. Israel, currently in conflict with Iran and Hezbollah, conducts regular airstrikes in Syria to limit their influence. Europe and the United States, having previously focused on limiting the expansion of ISIS, now view Syria as a battlefield to counter Iran and Russia, Assad's primary backers. These powers depend on Syria to maintain their influence in the Mediterranean. Furthermore, Iran seeks to expand the Shia corridor to consolidate its control in the Middle East and establish a direct route to Lebanon through Iraq and Syria, enabling better support for Hezbollah, its main proxy force against Israel.
An end of an era of oppression in Syria.
On December 8, 2024, the Assad regime in Syria fell, marking the end of a totalitarian rule that had lasted since 1971, beginning with Hafez al-Assad, Bashar's father. In recent years, the regime had been weakened by reduced military and financial support from Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. Jihadist groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, backed by Turkey, launched a series of decisive offensives in northern Syria, steadily capturing more territory. The rebel advance on Aleppo marked the beginning of the collapse. Motivated by initial success, HTS pushed southward, capturing Damascus within days. The use of advanced technologies such as kamikaze drones and sophisticated combat strategies caused the regime's defenses to crumble. In less than 10 days, major cities fell, and government control dissolved. The population, exhausted by years of war, oppression, and economic crisis, offered no support to the regime, which remained politically and socially isolated. On December 8, 2024, rebels entered Damascus, symbolically marking the fall of the regime. Bashar al-Assad and his family fled to Moscow under Russian protection. Scenes of celebration, such as the toppling of statues and posters of Assad, were witnessed across the country. The Syrian army was exhausted, malnourished, and demoralized, suffering from internal issues like widespread drug addiction to Captagon, produced by the 4th Armored Division led by Assad's brother, Maher al-Assad. The troops' morale was further eroded by the country's disastrous economic conditions, with 90% of the population living below the poverty line and the currency in free fall. Hezbollah's withdrawal to Lebanon to confront the Israeli ground invasion left government forces defenseless against the rebel advances. HTS capitalized on this power vacuum to rapidly seize strategic territories. Assad's fall represents a significant defeat for Iran and Russia, which had invested enormous resources to support the regime. Turkey emerged as one of the winners, having backed the rebels and strengthened its position in northern Syria. The end of a dictatorship that ruled for over 50 years sparked widespread joy among Syrians, both within the country and among expatriates. This joy was symbolized by images of toppled statues and emptied prisons. However, Syria now risks descending into new rivalries among rebel factions. Although HTS is dominant, it does not have absolute control, raising fears of a possible transition from one authoritarian regime to another. HTS leader Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani proclaimed victory from the Great Mosque of the Umayyads, declaring a new chapter for the Islamic nation and solidifying the Islamist nature of the new order.
This victory, my brothers, is a victory for the entire Islamic nation. This new triumph, my brothers, marks a new chapter in the history of the region, a history fraught with dangers. leaving Syria as a playground for Iranian ambitions, spreading sectarianism, stirring corruption. It became the world's leading source of Captagon. But today, Syria is being purified by the grace of God Almighty and through the efforts of the heroic Mujahideen.
The fall of the Assad regime marks a historic turning point for Syria, but leaves the country in a state of deep uncertainty. Syria faces enormous challenges: the risk of clashes among rebel factions, a devastating humanitarian crisis, and the need for reconstruction, which currently seems far off.